Hello and welcome back. This is episode 16 of my vlog series about creating the art for a 2D video game. And today's episode is going to be another draw with me sort of format. So I am going to be sharing my screen and just drawing in real time and just commentating on what I'm doing as I go. So it'll be a longer episode and kind of podcasty, so if you want to do something else and just have me on in the background, this is a good episode for that, because it's just going to be a little bit chatty. So what I'm going to work on today is the background for our title screen. So I've been doing this more elaborate painting to go behind, the logo and the start menu and everything. And I've been spending a little more time on it, which I don't mind because I feel like the title screen is kind of, it's essentially, a person's first impression, of a game. Once they turn it on, the title screen is the first thing they see. So I don't mind spending a little more time on it. And this has been well underway for a couple of weeks. I've just been sort of picking away at it in between working on other things. And so I figured I'm getting closer to being done with it. So I thought maybe today I could kill two birds with one stone and I would make a video and draw at the same time. So without further ado, why don't I go ahead and switch over to my screen and we'll dive in and I'll show you what I have so far. Okay, I am back and I've got my document open here, and as you can see I've been noodling away on this morning a little bit. I actually got up really early before the kids were up so I could have some uninterrupted work time. But I've started refining this a little bit more. As you can see, this side of the canvas is a little more refined than this side, because I've kind of started over here and I've been working my way over. And everything is going to need at least a couple more passes, to get everything tightened up to the level I'd like. But let me go ahead and show you kind of the vision I have for this. So if we were to zoom in really close, so I can use your imagination, but so you open up the game, and I imagine it looking, so we're zoomed in, this is our background, and of course the real focal point will be the logo, which we don't have yet, but will. So let's pretend, okay, big logo. Game's called King Me. It's a big logo right there. I'm sure it'll look better than that. And underneath there will be, like a little menu bar with your buttons that say, new game, load game, or whatever. So those will be there, on the surface. And then behind it, I imagine this, the background just slowly scrolling. Wow, really slowly. It'll probably not be that. Maybe it'll be a little faster than that, but it just scrolls in the background over. And ideally, if I do my job right, it should actually loop on itself. So it should be seamless, so that this end connects up with this end and it just keeps going in this never-ending loop, behind. And so I thought that would be pretty cool. So that's kind of where I'm at with that. And so the background, of course, is basically just meant to sort of, be a support for the logo, which is going to be the true focal point, but I'm still having a lot of fun with it anyway. Okay, so let's dive right in here and start refining. So I am still using, of course, all the same colors that I used and have been using for all the other assets in the game. I do a lot more blending here, but the colors are all the same because that just helps it, I think, feel a little bit more cohesive, with everything else I've made so far. So I'm gonna grab a brush that I really like, and this guy is actually one of the old Photoshop brushes. I was really scared when Photoshop updated it was sometime this last year when it updated, and at first it appeared like it only had the new Kyle brushes, which are great. They're awesome and they are what I normally use. But there was one default Photoshop brush, this chalk brush, that I absolutely loved, and I was so afraid I'd lost it. But it is still there. If you go digging, you can still find it if you upload all the legacy brushes. And so I'm just going to go ahead and start chiseling away. So I don't want to start zoomed in too close. I've been staying back quite a ways as I just define all of my shadow shapes and all of my light shapes. And I will start zooming in closer and closer as I add more details. But I don't want to zoom in too close to start. So actually what I'm going to do is I'm going to start by just... I've got this terracing here on the edge of this bank, and this is landscape, by the way. It's just it's really just supposed to kind of have the same feel as the game, but it doesn't necessarily look just like the game. Obviously our game is much more flat because you're seeing everything from like an upper 3/4 kind of view. But I think it's okay if this sort of has the same feel. At least hopefully it has the same feel. And so something I'm going to go in here and do is I just want to sort of start defining some of this terracing here. As you can see, I've got the shapes sort of modeled out, but I'm going to start chiseling them away a bit. Kind of like I've been doing, defining the shapes in these rocky cliffs here. So I'm going in with this charcoal brush here, or chalk brush, excuse me, my chalk brush here, and just kind of drawing in the shapes. And, you know, if anybody's curious, I usually, back when I first started digital painting, I still remember my very first digital painting. And I remember I got, you know, an old, like, tablet for Christmas. I was getting interested in trying digital painting. I'd never done any before. I was in high school. And bless their hearts, you know, my parents got me this tablet for Christmas. It was just a tiny one, but it was really great for me to learn on. In fact, I think it was an old one, like a Graphite or something, you know, something that Wacom doesn't even make anymore. And I think it was more geared toward, like, photographers and photo editing. So it probably didn't even have, I mean, it was great for my purposes, but it probably didn't even have nearly the number of levels of, like, sensitivity and pressure sensitivity that some of their other tablets have. But that was what I started on. And I remember, you know, firing up, I didn't even have Photoshop then. I had, I was working on Corel Painter. And I remember firing that up and starting my first digital painting and just zooming in so close that I could see like every individual pixel, and that's how I did. I didn't even do a background, I just did like a character. And I spent forever on it because I was zoomed in so close that I could see, you know, like each individual pixel, and I just worked from the tiniest details backwards. I didn't do like a really refined sketch first. I didn't start with big shapes. I started with tiny details and went backwards. And that's, I've learned since then, not the most efficient way to work. Anymore, I start with really big shapes and like details don't come in. I spend 80% of my time zoomed back like this, and maybe the last 20% zoomed in, just like tightening things up. And I tell you what, I can get a lot more done that way. I've actually found that that's a really common pitfall of beginner artists, especially digital artists, is that we start out working small to large instead of large to small. And I think, at least speaking from my own experience, especially with digital, because we have the capability to zoom in as close as you want, like the temptation to do it is almost overwhelming. And I didn't have any, you know, any kind of formal training in digital art. In fact, I really didn't have any training whatsoever in digital until I started taking matters into my own hands, actually after college. I started really learning how to paint digitally. But I remember, you know, starting to paint digitally, and I would execute these super detailed paintings, or I would want to, you know, I see these fantasy illustrations and stuff online, and I would want to do stuff like that, you know, that was really hyper detailed and colorful, and I would sit down to work on these pieces, and they would take me months to do because I was zooming in so close, and I was just picking away at these, you know, detail by detail, and instead, you know, while this was going on, meanwhile, even when I was in college, you know, I worked that way for years. And I would see, you know, the fellow students who could turn out this really beautiful, detailed work every week. You know, every week they were bringing in a new piece, and I just thought, I was like, I've got to be so slow. I must just be super slow. And I just, you know, I just decided that must be it. They must just be fast. You know, that was the conclusion I came to. And while that was true, I was super slow. It was because of my technique, really. It had nothing to do with, you know, my brain processing power or whatever. At least I assume. But it had more to do with just my technique. And what finally worked, when it finally clicked, interestingly enough, was actually in my sculpture class. So I had to take sculpture, which I really liked. and my professor was awesome. And he taught us, to work from big general shapes to small shapes. And so you would start, we would start by, we did a lot of copying. You'd start with this big lump of clay, and there would be this bust of Abraham Lincoln, in the middle of the room. And the idea was that you were supposed to copy this bust, basically. You were supposed to try and match it exactly with your lump of clay. And so anyway, he would tell us, start with the big general shapes, start with make sure your head's the right width, make sure you've got all the proportions, make sure the eye sockets are in the right place, make sure your mouth shape is, the big and round mouth shape is there, and start with really general things, and then kind of last, you work on those surface details, like your eyes, make sure you sculpt out those eyelids, and you work on surface details like wrinkles and stuff, because if you do it in the opposite order, you can have the most beautiful sculpted eye ever, but if it's on a really wonky head, it's just going to look wrong, if your proportions are off. And I remember really struggling with that at first, and I would start over. I started over on that sculpture so many times, and there was at one point that I remember I was working on it, and I just figured I was close enough. I knew it wasn't perfect, but I kind of convinced myself that it was just close enough, and I was so tired of trying to get those basic shapes perfect that I just decided I was going to move on, and I started sculpting out this eye, and I was just in the zone, really zoned out, working on this thing, all the little details. And my teacher comes over, and he sees, of course, what I'm doing, and he just gets this grin on his face. He's like, "Oh, Erin, that is a beautiful eye you've got there." And he's just, had that tone. You knew he was up to something. And he's like, you know what I'm gonna do to that eye? Like, oh shoot! And he took his thumb and just gouged it out. And he did. I mean, he was making a point that I had moved ahead too fast, and it was super funny. And it made me think twice before I decided if I was really ready to move on to those surface details yet. But that was really my first time anybody had explained that to me, that you were supposed to work in this certain order. Which is really funny, that had never ever been explained to me before. And I had done lots of painting and lots of art, but nobody had ever told me that, not that there's necessarily a wrong way to do art, and I've explained before, I don't think that's super helpful advice, but there certainly are more efficient ways to do art. I will go there for sure. And nobody had ever explained that to me before, and it was super helpful advice. And the other thing that really, drilled that into my head was watching James Gurney paint. And if you're not familiar with him, he's like a wizard with a paintbrush. I have one of his books, I think Color and Light, which is kind of a must-have, I feel like, for any painter. It's just brilliant book, and super helpful. He has a good way of explaining things and illustrating them in a way that's really easy to digest, and I like his book a lot. But anyway, he also has a YouTube channel, which I found. And he does generally really short videos, just plein air painting, and he is amazing. I am mesmerized watching him paint, because he will pick the most mundane subjects, things that I would just, if I was wandering around Main Street looking for something to paint, I would have walked right by, would never have even considered. Can you hear that? Some of my little girl is playing with the blinds. But like I said, this is real life, so I'm not going to stop her. I'm just going to keep working. But anyway, so he'd pick this rundown drugstore, with a neon sign. It just looks it does not look aesthetically pleasing in the least. And he, plants down his what do you call that? An easel. He plants down his easel, and he gets out his paints, and he usually works with gouache, sometimes watercolor, casein, which I'm not familiar with at all, but he works with it sometimes. And he just starts, he starts to paint, and he just churns out these masterpieces. And when you watch the way he paints, he practices what he preaches, for sure, because he just starts with these giant blocks of light and dark. Basically defines the lights, big giant block, this big block is the light, this big block is the shadows, And then he essentially just from there just starts making smaller blocks, smaller blocks of light and shadow and smaller blocks and breaking up until finally you look at this thing and it is just gorgeous. I can't get over how he does it. It's amazing, but I've tried to sort of take that to heart. Now I'm nowhere near as good as James Gurney, and nobody is near as good as James Gurney. He is like he is a creature all unto himself. But I will, if I can remember, I'll try and link his YouTube channel here, because if you haven't watched him, you really should, because he's amazing. So I'll try and remember to link that below. But anyway, I learned a lot just from watching how he works. Which, interesting enough, is actually, I know everybody learns in different ways, and depending on the subject, I learn in different ways, but when it comes to art, I learn best if I can see somebody else do it, if I can watch them do it, then I can do it. Which, fun side note, when I was in college, or getting ready to go to college, actually, I was trying to decide, what I would major in. And I had about 3 options that I was considering. I played the French horn, so I was thinking about doing music, but that one was pretty easy for me to dismiss because I just wasn't. I worked really hard at it, but I was not naturally gifted at it. I did not have a lot of natural talent. I just worked really, really hard. And it definitely wasn't my passion. I've always actually found music to be super confusing, just like music theory, I should say. Like, I can play the notes, I can read music, but music theory just like goes way over my head. I don't get it. And so anyway, that one, it was pretty easy for me to sort of check off and say, you know what, I love this and I want to do it as a hobby, but I don't need to make I don't need to pursue it as like informal education. So that one was pretty easy for me to mark off my list, as much as I love to play, and I did play all throughout college. Then the other one, I really enjoyed creative writing, and I thought, well, maybe I could do this. But when it came down to it, and so it was between that, and I really obviously loved art, have loved it my whole life, and so it was time, to declare a major. I realized that, at least for writing, I find writing really easy to learn about by reading. So if I read writing, I can usually dissect why I think it's good. And what I can usually dissect, what the author has done and why it's effective. Like I can self-teach myself. I can self-teach a lot easier with writing than I can with art, because I found that with art, I could look at a picture and have no idea how somebody did it. And just be like, your mind's just blown, because to me it was just magic. It's like somehow they magically created this thing. But if somebody will sit down with me and paint in front of me, it just, everything clicks, and I can go and I can see exactly what they've done, and I can go and I can repeat it, to a certain extent. Not to say that I can master everything in one go, but that's just how I learn when it comes to art. And I realized that in school, I was going to have a lot of opportunities to essentially watch people draw, watch people paint, and I would be really turning down some really cool opportunities to learn if I didn't take advantage of that. So that was basically how I arrived at my conclusion. Okay, so I've defined these rock shapes a little better, but I think they're feeling just a touch pasted on. Like they look like they're stuck on the environment, like a sticker, as opposed to receding into it. So you know what, I'm gonna try and add a little bit more green back in here. We'll just see what this does. Oh yeah, that helps, I think. Just gonna lightly dab that on there. So that way it kind of recedes into, whoops, I just changed my brush. It kind of recedes and looks like it's part, of the grass. Looks like maybe some, grass or moss or something might be kind of growing on there. Yeah, there we go. I like that. We're just gonna kind of lose that sharp edge. There, I like that better. There we go. Actually, this is one of the few brushes that I will actually mess with the opacity at all. For the most part, I used to do that all the time. Like I said, when I was an early digital painter, didn't really know what I was doing. Not that I really do now either, but when I really, really didn't know what I was doing, I used to set my brush down to really low opacity and just build up, you know, bazillion layers. And, not that there's, I mean, that has its place too, but I think a lot of it just stemmed from just like fear of putting down, you know, a permanent bold sort of mark. And I don't care about that anymore. Like I said, like I said so many videos ago, I am a mostly reformed perfectionist. I don't mind being a little bit more messy anymore. And just like going for it, and if I mess it up, just paint over it. But this brush in particular, this chalk brush, I do actually mess with the opacity a bit because I can get this kind of cool glazing effect where it's not, it's, you know, not completely opaque, but I can just sort of tint something a different color if I want, and I like that. So that's kind of what I'm doing here. I'm just adding this tint of this green. Just kind of make that recede just a bit. I do want a little warmth in there, but I don't want to go nuts. I really want most of my warmth to be on these, like, cliff walls. It kind of draws your eye upward a bit, I think. So that's kind of my goal there. And I think, you know, I think I'm happy with that for the moment. Like I said, I will be zooming in and doing at least 2 or 3 more passes on this to get all the details nailed down. But that kind of brings it up to the same level of polish as, like, some of the rest of this. So let's move over here, because I am dying to get in on these trees. And you know, on that same note, I used to always paint with a ton of layers. I remember, like I said, that very first digital painting, which I was so proud of, and rightly so. Like, when it's your first time doing anything, I mean, it's okay to be proud of it, and I was super excited, you know, what I had managed to do. But I can't even tell you how many layers I had on that painting. I mean, that computer had to be running so slow by the time I was done with that sucker. And I mean, I had dozens probably of layers because, again, it's like I was afraid to make a wrong mark. You know, I wanted a safety net underneath each mark. You know, once I made that mark, I wanted to be able to delete it or erase it without harming anything else that I'd done. And so I would do layers for everything, which isn't a bad way to learn, but anymore, I almost don't even paint with them. I actually created a new layer this time, so just at the end of this painting session, I can show you a before and after. But I almost never even do that. I usually, when I'm painting anymore, just paint on a single layer. So I think it has a more natural, blended kind of look. I will add layers sometimes if, like, I want to test something and I'm not sure if I want to commit to it. But most of the time I just commit and then, you know, regret it later. Or I just, you know, because you can always paint over it. That's the beauty of digital. Like, layers are a great tool, but yeah, I don't use them as much as I used to. I use them very sparingly anymore. So as you can see from these different tree shapes I've done, I'm going for super graphic blocky trees. Like, I'll soften them up a bit when I go into the detail stage, but what I'm trying to do is really define the light plane and the dark plane and the shadow plane and the reflected light plane. I mean, I'm making them super blocky, and I actually like that stylization. I think it's more video game-esque, actually. So, like, this tree here went super stylized, and I love it, actually. I really like this shape. And so I'm doing a couple of, like, pine trees here. And I'm first just, like, defining the silhouette, essentially. Like, I want to make sure that they have a really clear read and that they're just kind of a cool, interesting shape. So I'm not worried about details or lights or shadow yet. I'm just gonna, like, make sure these are super cool shape that you want to look at, that, like, you know, is interesting. I don't want it to be something that somebody's just going to pass over. I mean, I want them to be, yeah, have some visual interest. And I'm thinking these ones are pine trees, so I'm going with all the way, not really, I don't want you to be able to see a trunk. I kind of want to go all the way to the ground level. No, I like this one, the shape of this one quite a bit. This one seems a little bit, like, too symmetrical for me. I think I'm gonna knock that back just a hair. I want to make it just a little more abnormal, essentially. So here we go. This is a good use of those layers that I normally don't use. But since I am working on a separate layer for the sake of this video. Because, like I said, well, in fact, I certainly won't finish this during the course of this video. But hopefully I'll make some progress and I'll be able to show you, you know, before and after by just removing the layers so you can see what I've done. Because sometimes in the moment it's a little bit hard to tell. But I'm gonna just go ahead and I'm basically just chiseling out these shapes, which I really enjoy doing, actually. Just really chiseling away. That is kind of a cool shape for a tree. What do we think of that? You know, actually, I'm going to simplify this edge. Whoops, wrong color. I'm going to simplify this edge just a hair. And these trees are far enough in the background that I think they're going to be fairly bluish, just from that atmospheric perspective. There's enough atmosphere that these trees will probably be quite bluish. Like these ones too, I made them fairly, they're not really vibrant green except on this reflected plane here. These ones I think will be similar. This guy, because it's in the shadow and also in the shadow of this really warm cliff face, I thought making that one more vibrant made more sense. Just more naturalistic, because it's going to catch that warmth from that cliff face. Okay, I like that shape, that's cool. Alright, so let's run with that. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to define those top planes. And this is another one of those cool things I learned actually from James Gurney's book. He's kind of the subject of today's video. But like upward, if you've ever spent any time, you know, you're outside really observing, looking at like not just trees, any object really in natural light, but we'll use trees as an example. If you've looked at trees really close and at their leaves, leaves have kind of a waxy coating on the top plane. And so they catch, they actually reflect more light than passes through them. And so if you back up, you know, far enough to where you're not really seeing the individual leaves, but are seeing a tree more as like one big shape, you'll notice that like the top of it tends to have sort of a cool cast to it. Like, it has a little more blue and gray kind of white light to the top. But on the other hand, if you take a leaf and you look at it from below, the bottom of a leaf does not have that same waxy coating. And when the light passes through the leaf, that's when you get that super vibrant green. So the top plane of a leaf is going to have a lot more blue and just kind of a cooler color overall, and the bottom plane is going to be super, super vibrant. So when you compound that, when you back up and look at like a whole tree, you know, back up far enough to where you're seeing it as a big shape and not necessarily as, you know, a bunch of little leaves combined. But you're going to get that same thing. The bottom planes are going to be much more vibrant than the skyward facing planes. And of course we can compound that too, because in this case the bottom planes are facing the grass, which is going to reflect light up onto the bottom planes of these trees. And so we're going to get these super vibrant green underplanes basically. And that's what I'm carving out here on the underside of these trees. Is I'm kind of picking out where I think the bottom planes would be. And I'm making those super vibrant green. Meanwhile, the top sort of planes, anything facing upward, facing the sky, is going to have a cooler sort of blue. It's going to have a blue cast to it. There we go. So you can kind of see the shapes are starting to. I'm just chiseling away. They're starting to really emerge. And they're starting to hopefully look kind of like trees. Although right now, again, they're kind of suffering from the same problem that I had over here with the rocks. They're looking a bit pasted on, but I can knock that back. And in fact, I will. I'm going to start taking some of that color from the ground plane and bringing it in. So they start sort of receding a bit and looking like they're in the environment and not on the environment. So it's kind of interesting because in outdoor and natural light environments, of course, upward-facing planes tend to be cool-colored and a little more washed out, and downward-facing planes tend to be warmer and a little more vibrant. But indoors, you can sometimes have the opposite, at least in cases of, like our house, we have incandescent lights, and they create a really nice warm light. And so upward facing planes that are facing, the lights on the ceiling can be kind of a warm gold orange kind of color. And downward facing planes tend to reflect, whatever color the floor is. And in our case, our carpet is, we've got carpet and tile, and both are kind of a nondescript beige color. So, downward facing planes aren't going to have quite as much, they're not going to be quite as richly colored. But you can also have, scenarios, say, like, especially in any kind of a commercial setting, you walk into Walmart and they have those fluorescent light bulbs that are just like murder on your eyes, but they're like, they have that sort of a pale, cool green cast to them, makes everything feel kind of sterile and flat. And so in that case, upward facing planes are going to adopt that color instead. And actually you can really use that to your advantage if you're designing like, interior spaces, and depending on what feel you want. If you want a space that feels really sterile, or just like illustrating somebody at their soul-sucking job or whatever, like if you want to create that kind of feel, go for some very green, greenish sort of fluorescent lights, and you'll kind of get that. You'll get that same feel. So, there you go, pro tip. I'm actually kind of going for, like I said, before, these don't necessarily look like, doesn't necessarily look like the game in the sense that, actual, what you could expect to see, from actual gameplay. I don't know if that's a bad thing or not. I'm trying to think. I certainly see plenty of promotional posters or ads or whatever for games that don't look much like the actual game. And I'm not sure if that's a turnoff for some people or not. In this case, though, I am trying to match the feel of the game, even if it doesn't look like... this certainly doesn't look like the actual gameplay, the actual in-game... Your in-game aesthetics are quite a bit different. But the colors are the same, and so hopefully it has the same feel. And that's really what I'm going for. I want it to feel like the game. If it doesn't look like it, hopefully it'll feel like it. Alright, what do we think of those trees? I think I feel pretty good about those for now. I feel good about moving on from those for now. Like I said, these are all, everything's gonna need another 2 or 3 passes, especially for the stuff closest to us. It's gonna need more passes to just like add detail and really tighten up the edges and the borders and stuff. But this is like, I can't even tell you how many passes this has been. It's quite a few. But if you want to see where I started, here you go. There we go. That's my sketch I started with. Now, how detailed is that? I tend to, I used to do really, detailed sketches. Anytime I was going to do a big environment piece like this, I wanted to plan it out. I wanted to be ready and have everything planned. And like I said, my perfectionism has really taken a nosedive. I actually I've discovered the process of kind of finding things, almost as I work on it. So I had a general idea of what I wanted and a general idea of the feel that I wanted. But then, basically, I just went in and, so I had this very scribbly sketch, and then I just went for it. I find that I get a much more, if I spend too much time really, detailing out the sketch beforehand and nailing down exactly what I want where, my drawings tend to get very stiff. I don't know, I think, I don't think I'm the only one who has that problem. But my drawings they lose a lot of life, especially when I draw exact outlines. And I really like line art for that, just for the record. I really like doing line art. It's something I enjoy a lot. But I find that if I go and draw out the line art very exactly and precisely, and then go ahead and paint over the top, my drawings tend to lose a lot of life. They end up looking quite stiff. And so I'm much better off just giving a very loose sketch so I kind of know where I want, where I want things, and then just like going for it. Which is kind of basically what I did here. So if you're wondering how much planning I did for this piece, it was like none. It was like basically none. I did a couple of sketches in my... Actually, I shouldn't say that. It's not entirely true. I did some sketches in my... just in my sketchbook, which I then, transferred very loosely into Photoshop. But like I said, a lot of this has been made up as I went along, just feeling like what kind of shapes do I need, paying attention to mix, big shapes and small shapes, and breaking verticals and horizontals, and just, making sure that everything there's a design and a pattern to everything I do. And I just feel out that way. And that's another good reason to start far back and then to zoom in, so start big shapes to small. Because if your shapes look really good from far away, then chances are they'll look good close up. And the reverse is often not true. Okay, so back here, pretty good, but I feel like these trees still look like maybe they're pasted on a bit. So I'm gonna go in and sort of soften that line there. I don't want them to look like they're, like I said, I don't want to look like they're pasted on. Soften that. Really blend that out. So it all kind of merges together a bit. There we go. That's looking better, I think. I can actually pull that shadow color, but I won't pull the shadow color up, but I can also pull the tree color down. There we go. That's looking pretty good. Yeah. Oh? Yeah, I'd buy that. I'd buy that. Okay. I'm gonna call that good for now and then move on to the next step, because like I said before, this is gonna take several more passes, but I really want to start working on this wall here. So I was looking at a bunch of pictures of like the Irish countryside, and I'm sure they have a name, so if somebody, knows what it is and wants to let me know in the comments. But whatever those stone walls are that are just everywhere, you look at pictures of the Irish landscape, and they've got all the sheep. They've got the fields of sheep and the little lambs, and they've got everywhere these just stone walls that sort of act as fences, I guess. I don't really know what the purpose of them is, but they sure look cool. Anyway, so I wanted to replicate that here, and with these walls, and I want to be careful because I want closer. The closer end of the wall here, I think you should be able to see sort of the individual stones, but as we get farther away, I just want to suggest the stones, so I don't want to be able to see individual ones necessarily, because otherwise that makes it look closer. I want to maintain some of that perspective. Alright, that's not too shabby. But as you can see, I've already gone through, now I'm kind of drawing on just generally where I want the stones to go, just with this really rough brush. But I've already gone in for this video and defined just the light plane and the dark plane. So I've got this top plane that's, obviously lighter, it's in the sun, and this side plane that's catching all the shadows and is casting a shadow here on the grass. So as long as that's working, the wall should read pretty well. The most important thing, of course, is to make sure that your values are working, and then color is very secondary. In fact, I need to check my values. I haven't checked them for a little while. Let's do a quick value check. Just gonna turn off my colors here and see. Alright, I think this is where, I think I'm going to darken this area a little bit though, so we draw more attention closer. Because right now my darkest darks are actually, a lot of them are on these trees, which I don't mind necessarily because they sort of act as natural focal points. And in this case, I'm trying to avoid actually having a really strong focal point in any one place because the focal point is going to be the logo, that's going to be splat in the middle there. But I feel like it would help lead our eye if maybe this end of the wall was just a hair darker. So I'm going to just darken that up a bit. Not going to go nuts. Well, not going to get too carried away, but it will get sort of carried away. Alright, I like that's a little better, I think. And in fact, I think I'm going to darken it. And I'm going to throw a little green in there too, because it's going to be catching light from the grass. There was going to be bounce light from the grass up into this shadow here. And also, I imagine, I imagine there's got to be some moss or lichen or something growing on this wall, because I imagine it's an old structure, been there for a long time. These stone shapes, and I'm really taking care, or trying to take care to make sure I'm really varying them in size and shape, at least to a certain extent. Because nobody likes to look at same. We like, our eyes really like variety. So I've got like this really thin stone here, and it's wedged up against this bigger one. Thin, and sometimes, break the plane in half or into quarters with the different sizes of stones. Okay, so I'm feeling pretty good about that so far. I'm going to just lightly draw out some potential stone shapes over here, but like I said, I don't really want to go nuts. Through here, I want to suggest a stone texture without actually drawing one, because I don't want that end of the wall to start pulling forward. It needs to recede, because it is going into the distance. And actually, I like the idea of thinking that maybe some of the stones have crumbled off. Like I said, this has been here a long time. Maybe they've crumbled off and are, have gotten kind of overgrown. And so I'm going to kind of suggest, too, over here in the grass, thought I could kind of suggest some stones that have crumbled away. I've kind of gotten overgrown in the grass, and I can go detail those more later. There we go. Just kind of looks like, maybe this wall used to extend farther or something, and it's just, over time has eroded. There we go. I buy that. Okay. Of course, right here, this end of the wall is in shadow anyway from this cliff and from these trees, so even the top plane is going to be in shadow, but it is also going to be catching bounce light from the sky still, and so making sure to define those two planes, even though they're both in shadow, is going to be important, or we won't be able to understand this form. Right now, I'm going to kind of flatten it out and then go back in and try and chisel out that top plane without really drawing a lot of attention to it, which is going to be an interesting challenge. Okay, let's see how I do here. I'm going to kind of just suggest it. I think green might serve us well here too, actually. A little bit of a pale green. Because just this environment, there's so much green going on that I think it would probably catch a lot of that from these trees. It's going to be catching some of that green. So I'm going to bring some of that into the top of this wall. There we go. Okay, I think I've almost got it. Almost. I am going to define out, change this a bit. To make that shadow fairly strong. I do like strong shadow shapes, as you can probably tell from this picture. That's just one way I really like to draw, paint. Okay, almost. Alright, I'm going to actually beef up the light here, this side of the wall, because then by contrast, this looks a lot more shaded. Alright. Okay. I think we're getting there. You know what, though? I think that this side of the wall, I'd made it darker, but I think I lost that. I think I lightened it too much, so I'm gonna go in and fix it. That's kind of, when I was detailing out these rocks, I think I kind of pulled a lot of that forward. I'm gonna set the opacity way down on this brush. Just start bringing some of those darks back in this wall here. Yeah, there we go. There, easy fix. Easy fix. Here we go. Alright, let's check those values again. Okay, yeah, that's much darker than the surrounding area, so that's working for me. And I think it does a good job of leading to this tree, which sort of acts as a bit of a focal point. Like, it is just one of the areas of most interest. It's also very, this tree is kind of a different shape than a lot of the areas around it. Everything else has got more blocky kind of shapes, and this is more of a, has more round and curved kind of shape. So I think it acts as sort of a natural area that your eye wants to go. So I kind of want this rock wall to lead to it. So that just makes good sense. Like I said, you know, before, this whole background is going to be basically a second read. I mean, the thing we're really going to be looking at, text draws your eye more than images do in a lot of cases. So, logo, text, and faces. So if you put a person in an image, that's where the eye goes first, as well as text. And that's kind of, what we need, of course, on our title screen, is you're supposed to go to the title of the game, and of course the menu, so, which has your options to, you know, start a new game or to resume your game, and that's where the attention of the viewer is going to go. So this whole background is just a second read, but it should make a nice backdrop, hopefully. Alright, I'm feeling pretty decent about this so far. Bring up some of this grass. There we go. I don't want this line on the bottom to be too clean. I want it to look like, you know, like this wall's been here a while, and this grass and things are kind of just growing up the side, and so I don't want that bottom line to be super clean. I'd like it to look like, you know, it's been overgrown just a bit. I'm feeling that. Alright. A lot of this, when I do landscapes, I really like doing landscapes. I have quite a few of them in my portfolio, actually. They're all, like, made-up kind of stuff, for the most part. Just fantastical sort of landscapes, but I really like the sort of push and pull aspect of them. Because, like, I push something darker, or I push the detail and then I pull it back. You know, I realize, like, you know, that's too detailed, that's too dark, that's too light, and then you pull it back. So there's a lot of push, pull until you get it just right. That's exactly what I'm doing right here. I just pushed, you know, I layered a bunch of green on here so we would lose that hard edge, but I lost it a little too much, so I'm going back in here with a little harder edge and just tightening up some of these lines. But I don't want to go too far. Okay. I feel pretty decent about that, actually. Alright. Say we back up again and take a look at what it's... Okay. Yeah, you know, I'm feeling pretty good about that, actually. You know what? I don't think I'm going to mess with that too much more today, although I do actually think I want to do a little smoothing right there. to kind of recede some of those individual rocks. I want to be able to see the individual stones up close, but they need to recede a bit as we go. So I'm gonna just do that right now. Recede. And those back. Too wild and crazy. Bring the grass color up there. Okay, I feel pretty good about that for now. Alright, so we'll move on. So I feel good about that level of refinement. I need to mess with this bush. This bush is a mess. I knew I wanted some kind of a bush there, but this is just like, that is not well thought out. I can do better than that. Okay, let's mess with this bush. Compositionally, like, the purpose of me sticking a bush here, you know, at all, or some other shape, is basically to keep your eyes from wandering off the picture plane. So I've got a lot of lines here, you know, between this wall, and we've got just the lines of the landscape. I'm gonna have this sort of dirt path weaving back into the mountains here, and we've got, you know, the terracing on this hill. I mean, all of these lines, they lead in, but they also lead off. They also lead off the page. And that's not, obviously, where I want your eye to go. So I've got to find ways to break that up. Like here, I managed to do it just by, you know, chunking off this bit of landscape and turning that into the edge of the a little cliff, essentially, where it drops down into the water, which will meet up over here. And so that was a good way to do that. And of course, this line will connect up with this one, you know, the edge of that bank. But right here, if I need this bush to sort of intersect some of these lines and keep your eye on the picture plane and keep it from getting pulled off. And that was kind of the point of these. And I'm thinking, I'd like it to be just a little bit more freeform. Not realistically so. Because I don't want it to stick out as being inconsistent with the rest of the picture. Sort of the rules that I've set up for this image are that everything is very geometric and everything has very defined planes and shapes. So I don't want to pull away from that too much, but at the same time it does need be slightly more. I'm going to have to add more details, some more design elements into this in order for it to look closer to us than, say, like these three trees are. Let's see. So I'm kind of liking that. I wonder if that's big enough. I could go bigger. I've got a lot of little shapes, you know, here with just like the little stones, and so this gives you kind of a place for your eye to rest too, essentially. You know what, I think I could probably even go bigger with that. Let's do it. I am gonna make that just a bit bigger, a little more dramatic. If I go too far, I can always pull it back, but I'd rather test it. I mean, this whole picture is, been emphasizing things, and certainly it's not true to life in any way. So might as well do it some more here. Now I think this bush would be casting a bit of a shadow probably onto this rock wall as well, so I'm gonna pull a bit of a shadow down onto this wall. A little bit up this kind of smoky blue up into this bush, and because it is closer to us, I can get away with making it a more vibrant green. But I don't want it to be too vibrant, because I also don't want to really, like, draw your eye to this bush. It's meant to be sort of a bookend. So it's not really meant to be a focal point in and of itself. That does, throwing that shadow, I think, on the rock wall here does a pretty good job of also working as a bookend here, as a stopper. Keep you from your eye from following the wall off the page. It's supposed to be following the wall onto the page. Alright. Alright, so let's try bring in the lights here. I'm just gonna kind of play with this. I have a feeling, though, that's gonna look kind of spotty. I think I need to merge some of these shapes. I want it to look super speckly. Merging values. That's another good tip I have, I guess. If you look at things in nature, well, anything really, but especially things in nature, you look at a bush or a tree, you're gonna have spots of shadow and spots of light, you know, all throughout it, because, you know, there are breaks in the leaves, and you've got, and you get that, you know, dappled light effect, which is really pretty. But when you're painting, it's a lot easier to merge and make things, group your values together, and that's a lot more effective, actually, than trying to paint all of the individual tiny little lights and shadows. Merging your values can really serve you well. So either this object is half dark, half light, or like, say on these, you know, trees, I've got light planes, I've got mid-tone planes, I've got reflected light planes, and the little core shadow here. And that's kind of it. You know, I didn't go into doing, you know, all the little lights and shadows that come from, you know, the gaps in the leaves, because it's not necessary for understanding the form. Like I say, these forms have to read at a distance, and it's really not necessary have all those little details in them, and in fact it can be kind of distracting. Okay, as far as the shape of that goes, I think it's not too bad. It's looking very flat, obviously, and I want it to look more 3D. This is one of these instances where I think I am going to try to add a little bit of chaos to this, I think. Let's see, what do I want to try? I think I'm going to go back to my paint box and this impressionist brush. I think this guy is going to help us out. I need to add just a bit of chaos to this thing. Keep it from looking quite so stiff. Okay, yeah, just like some splats like that. Never fear, this looks like garbage, but I will pull it back. Promise it, promise. Of course, I'm going warmer green. Because it's closer to us, and we're not going to have as much atmosphere between us and this form of this bush. Alright, I'm starting to feel that a bit. Okay. It's starting to mean a little more to me. Sometimes I have a lot of times when I plan these paintings, or, you know, don't plan, as the case may be, you know, like I said, I have a feel for what I want, and sometimes I just have to play with it until I see it. When I see it, I know what I want. I'm gonna splat, 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 splat. Okay, this is starting to make some sense to me now. I know it probably doesn't make sense to anybody else, but trust me when I can say I see something. Just trust me on this one. Alright, here we go. Yeah, alright, let me get back my chalk brush. I think I'm onto something here. Baby. The little girl's just talking. Alright, let's get my chalk brush back. I'm going to turn down the opacity a bit. And I'm just going to start, like, getting in here and really digging and chiseling this out. Starting to make some shapes out of this mess. And this, again, because this is close to us, this is an area where I will be going in and detailing more. In fact, I'm going to knock that back even farther. There we go. See, like, shape there. Let's get that dark blue back. See, shape here. See a shape here. And I'm trying to sort of break it up. Little shapes, big shapes. See a shape here. Okay. I don't know if you guys are starting to see this or not yet, but trust me when I say I can see something. I think most of the time when people watch me paint landscapes, they probably just think I'm making a mess, which I totally am, but I really can see something. Okay, trying to see a bit of a shape. Here, you guys seeing anything yet? Alright, starting to see something right here that I like. Define this plane. Yeah, I see something there I really like. Okay. Go. Okay, I don't know. It's starting to make more sense to anyone? Okay, I'm gonna come in with this lighter sort of green color. Start defining this top plane a bit. And I'll go in here with a really fine brush and start picking out some more individual leaves and things, but at the moment my main object, of course, is just to define the planes. What's facing up? What's facing down? The rest of the details can just sit on top and, you know, look nice. But if I don't have defined planes, it's really hard to understand the form. It's hard to know understand what you're looking at. And if you don't understand what you're looking at, then I have failed as a visual communicator. Alright. You guys starting to see that? Starting to make some sense. I don't know if you're seeing what I'm seeing yet, but I'm gonna start chiseling this back a bit too. Okay. I think hey, baby. Okay. I'm gonna bring in some of this light. Sort of bringing this in. I'm still thinking about silhouette, you know, as I'm doing this. So I want to make sure this bush has a really cool shape. And I'm also thinking about value, because I don't want to lose the bush against the background. So I'm thinking about value. I want to make sure I pull and push my values so that it stands out enough. As its own, shape. Alright, I'm definitely feeling this more. Sometimes introducing a chaotic brush, like that impressionist brush that I love, it's like the best thing you can do to add so things don't look too man-made, even though this is all very man-made. I am liking this much more. Let's do a quick value check. Just a second. Alright, let's do a quick value check and see. Okay, now do you see the shape of that bush? Okay, yeah, I think that's working. I'm kind of losing the lights on this bush to the background. Which means either the bush has to go lighter or the background has to go darker. And I'm thinking the bush should go darker. Let's go in with that really quick and just see what we can do. I think maybe like a nice dark rich green. Let's push this guy. So I think the background, because of all the atmosphere and just, this warm kind of, I imagine it's sort of a morning light. I don't want to lose that. I think I might have to push both ways, actually. Let's try pushing both ways. Let's lighten the background and darken the bush. Lighten, especially because we've got green butting up against green here. And so it's all down to value or we'll lose these shapes. We're recovering it a bit. I'm gonna pull it. Alright. This is really light right through here. Also, if I make this really warm, because that background green is fairly cool. So if I make this really warm, that will help as well. Just to pull it. Let's warm that up just a bit. And I'm going to add some of that warm into this warm green into the shadow on this wall too. Go. Bit into the bush. Oops. Bit of that blue into the bush here. Kind of meld those shapes together almost. Alright, let's check that now. Alright, time for a value check. Okay, that's better. Much better. That's definitely more definition between the bush and that back shape. Okay, so I think that is probably a good stopping place for this video because I have to get this footage all uploaded if I'm going to get this video up today. So if you want to see what we've done today, alright, so this is before, after. Before, after. So that's all the progress that I made in this, whatever, couple hours. It's hard for me to keep track because I've been pausing occasionally to take care of the baby. But as you can see, actually, when you compare before and after, I actually got a fair amount done. So I'm going to keep, chipping away at this in between, working on other things. And like I said, this is not urgent. This is just, of course, the backdrop for the start menu. So they're really, in terms of priorities, this is pretty low priority. So I'm going to keep working on it. But I have been filming from the very beginning of this painting, and I will keep filming it through the end. So when I'm done with it, you'll get to see a video, a speed paint, basically a time lapse of the whole thing. So if you're curious to see where it started and how it finishes, I will have that. But thank you for joining me for today's draw with me, and I will see you again next Friday. Have a good week.